All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome back. I think my email it originally indicated that we were going to have Cadmus present first, but we are going to have Joe Loper lead things off with how the cost effectiveness is currently being utilized for Empower, and I'm sure he can answer any and all questions that you have. Without any further ado, Mr. Loper. Oh, and I am recording everything, so just everyone knows.
Good morning, everyone. See, I'm going to present my slide deck. I also sent it out a few minutes ago so y'all could write notes in it or whatever and have some, be able to review them afterwards. Let's see. Just going to give you my entire screen here. All right, so I'm going to run through the Empower impact evaluation and cost effectiveness methods, processes, a high level discussion of the methods and assumptions. I'm happy to go into detail on any of the individual elements, but this is a basically a high level run through of how we do things for Empower. And I want to say up front that my slides are ugly, and my wife does a lot of large group presentations and talks, and she said I should apologize for it. And I'll tell you the same thing that I told her, and that is that my objective is to show you how the sausage is made, and that ain't pretty. So I'll lean on Kitson a little here, Kitson McNeil, who's probably in the meeting, who, when he first came on at Maryland Energy Administration, said, "Well, Joe, I thought you just took a cookbook and with a technical reference manual and inserted some numbers and multiplied it out and reported the results." And I used to think that as well. I think it's not an uncommon thought, but it's really far from how things are actually done. And before I get into things, I just want to let a lot of you don't know who I am. So I'm the independent evaluator for Maryland. I report to commission staff, and I basically oversee the evaluations. So I work with the utilities and other stakeholders to decide how we're going to evaluate things, and then we dig in on whatever evaluation reports and worksheets that they do. We review them and provide comments back. So my role is both as to organize policy discussions around evaluation, as well as to review and verify the evaluations that are done by the utility evaluators. So there's a Guidehouse, basically Guidehouse and Cadmus and Apex Analytics do the evaluations for the electric utilities. Cadmus, Sammy Quadja and Scott Reeves do the evaluation for DHCD, and then Guidehouse, separate group, does the evaluation for Washington Gas. I've been in the energy efficiency area since actually the late 80s, and mostly on the advocacy side. Somewhere around 2009, with the American Recovery and Reconstruction Act, I decided that energy efficiency was getting its due. There were a lot of resources going to it, and that I wanted to go see how whether the savings were being realized from all these programs and all the spending that was going on. And so I actually started calling. I didn't really know any evaluators, but I just called around and said I want to become an evaluator. And so was my transition in 2010. I've been working in the Empower evaluation realm since 2010, just so happens, and became in the lead on it since for about 6 years. So here's what I'm going to walk through, and I'm happy to divert or back off things if I'm getting in too much detail. Y'all just feel free to communicate with me. I can handle it on the fly. First, I'm going to talk about the impact evaluations. Then and just kind of some high level concepts that we have to get our heads around. I'm going to then talk about our cost effectiveness analysis and analyses, and in particular, the input assumptions that we use and the different tests that are the priority test for Maryland. I'll talk, I'll give a couple slides on the extent to which I think we are consistent with the National Standard Practice Manual. And so people can disagree on that, but I'll give my take anyway. And then you know, in some ways, my objective here is to show you some sausage, but also to overwhelm you. I don't want to baffle you. I don't want to dazzle you. I want to overwhelm you a little bit because ultimately the Maryland process is built on the people, and you know, a lot of people getting together a lot. Too much, you know, as far as some people are concerned, to talk through these issues and constantly questioning and, you know, never settling. And that's been our MO for quite some time. And I think generally the state, at least the people I work closely with, are generally fairly comfortable with that at this point. It's always a little bit uncomfortable because we don't always agree, but. So I want to give you the high level about Empower evaluations. And this isn't just Empower evaluations, this is evaluations generally. So the first thing we're looking at is what happened as a result of the project or measure and that was installed and, you know, that the program is claiming credit for. And that's a gross savings estimate. You normalize for weather and occupancy and production and other things. But all you care about is whether the measure itself had an impact on, mostly our focus is on megawatt hours and megawatts. The second step, which is that's challenging enough, but the second step, which is often more controversial, is the net savings calculations. And the question there is what happened as a result of the Empower programs. So not only what happened as a result of the project, but what happened as a result of the Empower programs. What did the programs induce? In that those primary calculations are to subtract your free riders, people who say they would have taken the action anyway, and then add spillover. In our case, for all the programs, we try to include spillover, which is basically where customers indicate that they did something as a result of the program, but did not get an incentive from a program. Then the cost effectiveness asks, was it worth it? And these are our cost effectiveness, at least that I work on, are ex post. ICF and other people in this room are, you know, do the ex ante cost effectiveness. And the cost effectiveness looks from multiple perspectives: the utility and participants. That's the TRC test, the total resource cost test. A societal test, which I'll go in more detail later, but the societal test expands on that and basically includes emissions and a lower discount rate. And a participant cost test, so that's looking at from the perspective of the participant only. Then there's a utility only test, and then there's the rate impacts. Because I think most of the people in this room know that, you know, pretty much all of the energy efficiency programs will have an adverse impact on rates. That they may reduce bills, but they will increase rates. The ex post, we have an ex post focus, at least in my realm. The utilities and a intentional disconnection between what we do on the ex post side and what is done on the ex ante side. So we do all sorts of studies, we do sorts of evaluation, we have all sorts of discussions about different topics, but ultimately in terms of the ex ante program plans that are submitted to the commission, the utilities and DHCD decide, you know, which of the assumptions that they will use. And I often don't even see those assumptions. And I will say it seems a little weird, but the intention there is that you don't want to have me and the other evaluators signing off on certain parameters and then or methods, and then the utilities go use them, and then later on we're kicking ourselves and saying, oh, that wasn't that wasn't right. And I'll talk some more about that, because it's not, we do try to lock down and sign off on things in advance, but not everything.
Joe, I guess it's more of a comment.
Yeah.
Mr. Gravatt said, of course, important to note that not doing energy efficiency may also increase rates just by paying for different investments, such as poles and wires. This is more of an observation.
Yeah. Okay.
Good question.
Let's see. I don't disagree with that. I will say, though, that in terms of our cost effectiveness analyses that we do, and that these are pretty standard throughout the industry, that I very seldom see a RIM benefit cost that exceeds 1. They're usually less than 1. And if you were, in fact, this was, big battles were engaged back in the late 80s and early 90s around this very topic, where the utilities were using a rate impact test and nothing would pass. And so there was a huge effort to convince the utilities and the regulators that actually they should be looking at bills and not rates. And I'll actually come back to this later when we get to the NSPM. So I just want to show, I don't need to spend too much time on this. This is a graph I created, I think, for a meeting with one of the commissioners a couple years ago. I didn't try to update it after this here, but I just want to show what we're trying to deal with, at least, and this is just if we're dealing with energy efficiency. So the bottom curve there is actual consumption. So that's observable, right? Electricity that comes from meters, and that's compiled by the utilities, and goes into the state energy data system and all other sorts of places. The top curve is the constant intensity consumption, meaning if starting from 2008, if the kilowatt hours per GDP had been unchanged up to 2016, that's what the curve would look like. When we're trying to figure out, well, what did the utilities induce? How much impact did the utilities actually have on consumption? We know there's a lot of what's called NOMAD, or activity that's going on out there, energy efficiency improvements that are happening outside the programs. For one, I mean, if an HVAC system is replaced from a 14 SEER, which is the minimum standard, to a 15 SEER, that would not get a program rebate, but it's still an efficiency improvement. And so the top the gap between that top gray curve and the next curve, the consumption without efficiency, is fuel switching and structural. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on due to could be over this period due to conversion from electricity to natural gas heating, could be due to electric intensive industry leaving Maryland. Could be a number of things that are going on there that have nothing to do with the Empower programs. Then if we look at the efficiency that the programs, if you look at the gap between the orange bottom curve and that middle blue curve, that is showing what measures and energy efficiency activity that the programs touched. Doesn't mean they always caused it, just means they touched it. So if the utilities gave an incentive for an 18 SEER air conditioner, if they gave an incentive for an 18 SEER air conditioner, that total gap between the orange and middle blue curve would be included in there, even if the utility didn't actually induce the switch to the 18 SEER HVAC unit. And so a big challenge, as I said previously, was figuring out that free rider, that gap between the yellow and the blue, so that we know what we're ultimately really interested in is the gap between the yellow and the orange at the bottom, the Empower program induced savings. That's what goes into the cost effectiveness. That's ultimately, in my, some people will actually argue against this, but in my mind, that's where the rubber hits the road. All right. So in a little more detail, we have what happened or is happening. That's the measure savings as a result of changing an air conditioning unit or buying a high efficiency unit instead of a standard efficiency unit. That's relatively easy. I won't say it is easy. It can be quite challenging for some types of measures, but it is just relatively easy compared to a lot of the other things we have to deal with. Then there's a question of what would have happened, but for the measure. Again, this is the net savings, and that's figuring out. But for the measure, and that's figuring out what would have, what the baseline measure was. And generally, for measures where there's a federal minimum standard, we assume that's the baseline, but that's not always the case. There are quite a few measures or projects or situations where we have to define a baseline in other ways. And then again, the net savings is the induced savings, but for the program, what would you have done? And mostly, I don't know if I cover this, just for net savings, some of you will be would be interested in this. So most all of our net savings is based on self-report surveys of customer participants. And so the questions ask, but for the program, how efficient would the unit that you would have installed been? When would you have installed the unit? Would you have installed it? Would you have installed a new unit anyway, regardless of the program, or would you have waited a year? And then also, would you have installed fewer units if the program didn't exist? Fewer efficient units. And so that's the gist of the self-report surveys, which are sent out to a sample of participants. The exceptions are, there are a couple of exceptions. One is, especially where we don't know who the participants are. That's the case for our upstream lighting program and for the Energy Star retail products platform. And those are both based on market share, looking at market shares in over time. And in the case of lighting, looking at non-program state market shares versus program state market shares and developing a regression model around that. And, that's then used to develop our net to gross ratio. The only other one, the behavioral programs is worth mentioning. The behavioral programs, we don't have to develop a separate net to gross ratio for it. We don't have to ask the customers because the evaluation of the behavioral programs is based on comparing the treatment group, the people who receive the home energy reports, versus a control group, sample of customers who are left out of the program, so that you can compare the treatment group to the control group, the non-treatment group. And so that inherently addresses net savings. So an important component here, the measure savings, what would have happened but for the measure? So without trying to attribute it specifically to the program, those savings are counted towards the Empower goal. So the Empower goal is based on this blue line. The cost effectiveness, however, is based on the savings from without free riders and adding spillover. So it's based on the gap here is the Empower induced savings, and that's what we use in our cost effectiveness.
Joe, you got a question?
Okay.
Dr. Kawaja?
Hey, Joe.
Hello, Sam.
So first of all, these are truly ugly slides, but besides that, you do have the sausage part figured out. I know this is equally controversial, but in your graphs, in the graph right above this, I mean, there's also some spillover and market transformation that ought to be credited to the program, right? Especially for upstream programs, right? So some of the you see as fuel switching and structural and non-Empower efficiencies, some of that is caused by Empower.
Yeah, and we'd have to parse that out. You and I have discussed this topic on a number of occasions, and we often end up disagreeing at some point about what gets attributed to the program, or what, at least remember, our cost effective. I think where we usually get in arguments with people on that is that our cost effectiveness is based on what did the program do this year, what did it spend this year, and so some people say, oh well, you should be counting market transformation that's occurred as a result of the lighting programs that have been in place since 2010. Why are you ignoring that? And my short answer is, well, if we're going to do that, then we need to include the costs incurred for the program since 2010. And so I am not in any way denying that market transformation occurs. I'm just trying to keep the balance, the ledger, both sides of the ledger equal ultimately. But I totally agree, Sammy.
I also agree with you that you need to, the cost and savings should balance out in the benefit cost model. But the thing about market transformation is that not only do they not get counted, they count against you. A lot of people that you ask, would you have done this without the program? They say they would have done it, but they're not even aware of the fact that the product would not have been on the shelf, and the trade allies would not have been trained to deliver more efficient products. So it actually counts. Market transformation shows up as free ridership. I don't necessarily have a solution to this problem. I'm just stating that we are overly punitive to what we attribute to programs in our current models.
I think at least at a high level, I have no disagreement with that. Was there another question? And by the way, I'm looking at my slides, so I don't see so I know the sun's beating down on the back of my head. I may need to relocate or something. I don't want to get.
No, sir. No, that was the only question. I'll give you a heads up, sir.
Okay.
Oh, we got another one. Cindy?
Oh, Cindy.
What would be involved if you did want to start counting market transformation? So you're saying you would have to start looking at the cost starting in 2010. Would it involve, I would imagine it would involve a variety of things, including a change in law and development of different evaluation metrics. But I'm generally just curious what it would take.
Yeah, Cindy, we would spend a lot of time on it if we talked about it here. But I could send and I could distribute to the group some of the market transformation discussion, papers that we've seen over the years. It is, I will say, it's a challenging enterprise, and that doesn't mean it shouldn't be done. We do all challenging things all the time, but it is definitely not simple and not uncontroversial once you get into the details. Can I leave it at that, Cindy? And I can follow up with everyone?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Okay. No easy answer. I was kind of hoping there would be an easy answer, but there's not.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
Well, if anyone, there's Ruth, I saw Ruth Casella, which is on and, and Sammy and other people, if anybody has wants to give the nutshell answer on that in terms of your opinions about how we would do that, that would be welcome, I guess.
This is Ruth. I agree. There's not a nutshell answer. I think that may be for a future conversation within this work group.
Okay. And Cindy, trust that the ICFs of the world and Sammy and there are quite a few people out there who would advocate trying to capture this market transformation benefit. And so you're not alone in your interest. And so we can come back to that. That's okay.
Thank you.
All right. All right. So this is where I kind of want to, I guess, overwhelm people a little bit. So there's uncertainty is the name of the game. I have yet to be involved with an evaluation, an impact evaluation or cost effectiveness impact evaluation where we got to the end and I had certainly 100% certainty that our answer was right. In fact, I would say pretty much almost always I'm 100% certain that our answer is wrong. But that's not necessarily bad in my mind. That's a common, that happens all over the policy world. And I don't know, even if I go buy a candy bar, I don't really know how much I value that. There's no certainty really around it. All I know is how much I paid for it. So energy efficiency is no different in that respect, but we spend a lot of time dealing with these uncertainties and trying to nail them down and trying to put some bows on them. I'll just say we can meter the baseline sometimes, not always. So we could meter, if somebody was about to replace their air conditioner, we could send somebody in and meter that air conditioner consumption over the course of a year. And then we could meter for a year after that and then compare the two. But then we got to adjust for weather. We got to adjust for any sort of changes in occupancy in the building, other things that introduce uncertainty. And unless we got really big samples, ultimately we're just, ultimately what we fall back to is engineering calculations, which takes the full load hours and that's all in the TRM. So that we don't actually do a whole lot of metering. Now there are exceptions. Behavioral program evaluations are based on actual monthly meter data. Sorry, somebody's asking something.
Yeah, there was something popped up in the chat. Erica asked if you could place the presentation in presenting mode so that the font is larger.
Okay. Yeah, let's see. I'm not quite. Oh, here, let me figure out how to do that.
Yeah, I think if you look down at the bottom.
Yep.
And
yeah, it's blocked by this. Oh, there it is. Okay. Is it this one here, right?
Yes, sir. I believe so.
Okay.
There you go.
Now, the only problem with this is I can't see whether my head is blocking the sun. You'll have to tell me.
Well, I can see it, but so far you're good, sir.
Okay. So I had a bunch of people in the house this morning, so that's why I had to come out here. So my point is that it's unlike if I have solar panels on my roof, I can tell you with a high level of precision and accuracy each month how much energy those solar panels generated, but I can never, or hardly ever. It's hard for me to think of examples where I can do that with energy efficiency, and it's an important point in my mind because a lot of people don't quite get that, and we have to push back some on a lot of. There's at least a couple of years ago, and still to some extent today, was a lot of push for AMI data. We have AMI interval data at 15 minute or an hour, and so now you should be able to just plug the numbers in and pull your numbers out, and you'll know what your savings were. That is wholly not correct. At least in Maryland, I think this is the case everywhere. Enemy number one is bias. That's always what I'm looking for. Precision is really nice, but that is not my emphasis. My emphasis in my role is on bias. And I just threw out a few examples here of where precision is nice, but not if you're precisely wrong, meaning you're biased. If you're assuming a net to gross is 1, that's precisely wrong for most programs. There are a few exceptions. If you're assuming that the greenhouse gas societal benefit is 0, I would say that's precisely wrong. And give another example with hours of use for lighting. But so we focus. We try to have a reasonable level of precision. There are some industry standards built around that, but that is there's less emphasis on that here than probably in some other places. Bias is the emphasis, and that's where we'll go to. I'll come back later to our process, because that's how we fight the bias. The best way I know to fight bias is to have lots of perspectives, and no one in the room owns the room. And so I can come in. I often, in fact, come into rooms, and then Sammy, with thinking I know all the answer, or thinking I know an answer, and then Sammy points out how I don't, and then we have a discussion, and it turns out I don't, and then sometimes it turns out that I did know the answer. But the growth, and I think the success of the Empower evaluations is that we're constantly engaging in those kind of discussions, and have a lot of smarter people than me in the room to discuss things. All right, for cost effectiveness, the two primary tests in Maryland. This is if you want to go look a lot of this up, it would be in Commission Order 87082, which I think was June 2015. You would look in the 9154 case jacket, for example. So 9154 case jacket, Order 87082. You could pull a bunch of this stuff up. There's been some evolution of it since 87082 came out, but that established that the total resource cost and the societal cost test are the primary tests. It actually, if you read closely, established the societal test as the primary test, and the total resource cost test was kept so that there could be comparison between Maryland and other states, and between Maryland going forward and Maryland prior to Order 87082. So really, at least my interpretation of how that order reads is the societal test is ultimately the primary test. As the fact of the matter is that the commission, at least to date, has seldom asked about the societal cost test. The focus is really on the total resource cost test. But we do report total resource cost test numbers in the cost effectiveness every year, as well as societal cost and participant cost and utility cost and the rate impact test. They're all available in the, I think it's in the appendix of the cost effectiveness report. So as I said earlier, the total resource cost and societal test include all economic costs and benefits accruing to Empower utilities and program participants. It excludes transfers. This is something we wrestle with a lot, trying to figure out exactly how to handle this in evaluations. What is a transfer? So if a utility gives a rebate to someone for purchasing a high efficiency air conditioner, then that is considered a transfer. There was no economic cost incurred as a result of that. The utility handing $50 to the customer. The economic cost is incurred with the measure, and so we definitely, it doesn't mean that the rebates totally, that all the cost disappears. It just means that the rebates themselves are transfers, and we focus on costs associated with labor, capital, materials, and technology. So the things where there are opportunity costs, that's what we're looking for in a total resource cost and a societal cost test. It's stuff we can't use as a result of using it for the program or for the program measures. We screen in Maryland at the sector level. So there is a residential, as long as the utilities can have a positive residential sector TRC, then all is good. And as long as they have I'm not positive, a greater than one, a benefit cost greater than one for the residential sector, then all is good. And if they have a commercial sector benefit cost that exceeds one, then all is good. There have always been quite a few programs in each sector that are not cost effective on their own, those programs get carried by the highly cost effective programs. Limiting income programs are not included in the cost effectiveness for the utilities. That's done totally separately. And DHCD has its separate report that's done by Sammy and Scott Reeves. For those programs, they're never cost effective anywhere in the country, really, or very seldom. And so there's no expectation that they be cost effective. They happen in terms of on an energy basis. So they have there's a different agenda associated with those programs, and the commission recognizes that. Okay, given discussions in these meetings and elsewhere, it looks like the societal test is likely to get more attention in the future as opposed to the TRC, and I'll talk about the difference. The cost effectiveness policy, we use the latest, greatest information. So remember, for the gross savings that's used towards goal, we try to lock down as much as we can for the utilities, because otherwise they get really stressed out when the evaluators, when they think they're going to get in lighting hours of use of 675 hours a year, and then we come back and do a lighting study and conclude, oh, well, the hours of use is actually 435 hours a year. That creates endless stress for the utilities, and it's kind of not fair. A lot of the parameters that we deal with on the gross savings side, I think should be locked down, or it's fair to lock them down, because the studies are not. We did for lighting hours of use is a good example. I think we've done 3 or 4 since the beginning of Empower, and every time it comes out, hugely different, and it goes up and it goes down, and there's just there's a lot of noise in these studies, and it's not really fair when utilities are trying to meet their goal, and building their expectations of meeting their goal are based on certain parameters that are very important in the portfolio, for us to without some great care and discussion, at least for us to change those parameters really creates problems for them. However, for the benefit cost analysis, we'll lock down stuff for the gross savings, but when you get into the net to gross ratios, the incremental measure costs, the things that go into cost effectiveness, we do not lock anything down. We're always fixing and improving. The notion there is that our job is to give the latest, greatest information to the commission and stakeholders on cost effectiveness, and so we do. I'll say that on this issue of the locking things down, that will be a big question when you get into the potential study, whatever assumptions that you're using at the measure level, and since I think you're leaning towards a gross, if I recall correctly, you are leaning towards a gross emissions goal, or that's one of them, that that whatever goes into that potential study, if you put assumptions in the potential study that are greatly different from the assumptions that you then use on the back end for your cost effectiveness, everybody's going to be scratching their head and looking bad. And so it's just something to consider about, at least initially in the potential study analysis, to try to get aligned. We won't be able to align on everything, but at least for some of the big things, perhaps this group could figure out a way to do that. If anybody wants to get more detail on the cost effectiveness, really most of our policy comes out of the California Standard Practice Manual. There are a few exceptions, but that's the starting point for all of our cost effectiveness. And that's available online. All right, so the total resource cost test has its costs are incremental measure costs, program costs, except rebates, which as I said, are transfers earlier, unless they exceed IMCs, and this is unless they exceed the incremental cost, in which case we do count them, and that actually comes from the California Standard Practice Manual. That's somewhat controversial, and we've had a lot of discussion around it, but I think we've pretty much stuck with it. The benefits, the energy benefits for the total resource cost test in Maryland, we included avoided energy and capacity costs. Those are provided by the utilities, but vetted. I vet them. The Guidehouse vets them, so they get a pretty careful look. And the costing, we include electricity avoided electricity cost and avoided electric capacity costs. We also include fuels cost, but that's not I can't think of anywhere where we have a capacity cost there. Washington Gas has talked about it, but I think at this point we're just it's just an energy cost. But is Josh McClellan or anybody from Washington Gas or Mark Van Egan, anybody like that on? Just want to make sure I don't give misinformation on that. So there could be a fuels capacity cost. I just have to go double check. I can't remember.
Hey, this is Josh from Washington Gas. Yeah, I'll have to double check that too, Joe.
Okay.
That sounds
Thank you,
about
Josh.
right.
So I'm going to just leave it open right now. So, but we do include fuels, and there's, in fact, I just sent it to Dan yesterday or the night before for him to submit to the commission a summary of how we evaluate fuels currently and some suggestions for how we might enhance our fuel evaluations going forward in response largely to things that we're hearing in this group. Fuels in the past have not been a big deal. There's no they matter in cost effectiveness, so we have included them for quite a few years. And of course, Washington Gas, we are scrutinize the Washington Gas evaluations pretty carefully. But for propane and heating oil, basically it's TRM'd. There are TRM formulas that we use to calculate fuel savings. But there are I don't think there's any program that we don't fuel saving. Benefits.
Joe, you're starting to you're
sorry.
going in and out, sir. We just missed your last statement. You're kind of freezing up a little bit.
So we do maybe I could turn off my camera. That might help. I'll try it if it continues. So the so I was just saying, for fuels, we do include we do evaluate fuels for all of the Empower programs, and we're getting, as the more that there is interest in fuels, in particular coming out of this group, if there's increased focus on fuel switching and other types of measures like that, then we'll need to get even more aggressive with our fuel evaluations. But to now, there have been no fuel goals, and so we're mostly using TRM based calculations, with some exceptions where we actually have some bill analysis for gas consumption. We include a transmission and distribution benefit for the electric utilities. I think this is one also, Josh, where y'all, I don't think y'all did it this year, but you're talking about doing some locational benefits for natural gas too. Then the energy avoided costs are broken down by summer, non-summer, peak, and non-peak. So we at least that's how we figure out what the peak demand reductions are. And then we also include DRIPE, which is the demand reduction induced price effect. Basically, the notion there is that the programs reduce demand for electricity, shifts that demand curve to the left, which reduces the price of electricity, and that price of electricity goes to everyone who is purchasing electricity. This kind of goes to Jim Gravatt's point earlier. So DRIPE is counted as part of all of the programs, and it's a pretty we've knocked it down a little bit. I'm sorry, I've got my back. Give me 1 second. Sorry. She's more embarrassed than I am. So okay, so we have a DRIPE, and that's a DRIPE for energy and capacity, which basically the utilities get for 4 years, and then it's assumed that the market's clear and that goes away. And that's that's not all jurisdictions use a DRIPE, because we do it because there's wholesale. Because a lot of the generation is purchased out of the state. Otherwise, it would be a transfer. Judge, can I just check in? How are we doing? Am I talking too much, too little?
You're fine from my perspective. Nobody else is
That's good enough for me.
jumping up and down. So
Okay. All right. So in the total resource cost test, which currently or to date has been the really the test that gets the most attention, we include several non-energy benefits. One, in addition to the electricity benefits and the fuel benefits, we also have an avoided water consumption benefit for measures that reduce water consumption. We have an avoided lamp replacement benefit. This is really actually a very big benefit for at least for the lighting programs, because some of this will be going away. Some of it went away this year for 2020, and some of it will be going away in coming months as we make some adjustments per commission order from last year. But in a nutshell, the avoided lamp replacements are driven by program lamps, LEDs, that have much longer lives than the lamps that would have been installed if the LED wasn't installed. And so if a lamp has a 3-year, if a baseline lamp has a 3-year life and you put in a 20-year LED, some people would argue it should get, a 6.75 or something, 6.66 or something like that, replace 6.6 replacements. In other words, a benefit of installing an LED is that you have 6 avoided halogen lamps that you didn't or won't have to purchase, and therefore that should count as a benefit. Another benefit that we include is increased participant comfort. We've had this since 2015. This was in Order 87082, which approved this, and it said that so it gave the benefit. I'll tell you quickly where the benefit comes from, because a lot of people scratch their head when they say that we're including comfort. It was from a Tetra Tech NMR study in Massachusetts. It's pretty old now, 2015, I think. And basically they asked customers in HVAC and home performance programs, when you replaced, when you did this project, you got a comfort benefit. What is the comfort benefit relative to your energy savings? In other words, how much of a priority was the comfort versus the energy savings? And based on those responses, that ratio is multiplied by the energy savings, to get a participant comfort benefit. And so we took that. There were Massachusetts at that time, and Tetra Tech NMR and others had a lot of other non-energy benefits, just to give us some credibility, because this one gets, again, people cross their eyes on this one sometimes, or actually I've had people laugh out loud at me when I raise this one in meetings. And in our defense, there were a lot of things that we left on the table, and that other jurisdictions are including that we didn't include. And that is partly just because we want to be able, we want to have defensible numbers. There was just some logic that just wasn't passing at least some of our collective sniff test here in Maryland. But all of these things are open. An important point here is all of these non-energy benefits are open for discussion, as part of the future programming work group. This is how we do it now. There's a lot of people in the room here that can come forward, I'm sure, with a lot of really good ideas and thoughts. And I know BCA, Carol Rinaldi's group, they've advocated on a number of occasions, I think others have, for including health benefits associated with home performance measures, that sort of thing. So anyway, we're always open to suggestions. These are what we currently use, but no one should feel like this is the final end all. On the non-energy benefits, we also included an avoided limited income arrearage financing cost benefit. This benefit only goes to the electric utilities. It's basically as a result of reducing limited income energy consumption. there's a certain number of customers that will no longer have arrearages, and so the utility does not need to finance those arrearages until it gets paid, and so that's a cost that's also included. So that's the extent of the non-energy benefits for the TRC. I'll come to the emissions in just a second. For discount rates for the total resource cost test, it's the weighted average cost of capital. This is another area where there are plenty of people who would argue that we should be using a different number here. Usually they argue we should use lower numbers, but I have heard the opposite direction. So we use the weighted average cost of the capital of each of the electric utilities and Washington Gas. It's their latest approved numbers. It varies by utility and by KW and KWH, and like 6 to 10% is roughly the range for those discount rates for the used in the TRC. All right, the societal cost is the same as the total resource cost test, except for two things. One is the societal cost test uses a lower discount rate. It is 3%, and this was prescribed, as was the weighted average cost of capital for the TRC in order 87082. We use a 3% real discount rate, plus we add the inflation rate that's currently 2.03%. So we're using that inflation rates based on a 10-year, kind of moving average. And so it's now 5%. So you can see it's not, at least for some of the utilities, the societal discount rate is only a couple percentage points lower than the discount rate used for the total resource cost test. So this is one where definitely people have argued this should not be so high. It should be, some would argue zero, some would argue treasury bills. But we won't go into that. That is something that may warrant discussion. That's up to the group. Air emissions benefit in 2020, it's 2.4 cents per kilowatt hour saved. There's an air emissions benefit is also applied for natural gas savings. So this you might notice in Order 87082, the Commission said 0.2 cents per kilowatt hour, and that's what we used for a number of years. But then, in fact, actually, I think I have a slide on this. Let me see. In 2018 to 19, I think the latest study is from 2018. There was a Daymark photovoltaic study that was commissioned by the Commission, and its conclusion in terms of a cost of carbon, that's just cost of carbon, not criteria emissions, was 2.3 cents a kilowatt hour. Based on that, the utilities in our evaluation advisory group argued that we should be using a much higher cents per kilowatt hour number for our air emissions benefit, even though Order 87082 had said 0.2 cents. So staff, MIA, OPC, and all the utilities concurred with that, and so we switched over. We've updated it a little bit for 2020, but only a little bit. We've had a lot of discussions about updating it a lot more, but we ended up just leaving it as it is for 2021. I think we'll probably be revisiting that, although some people may not want us to revisit that. The current social cost, or our current emissions benefit, includes a global societal cost of carbon. It includes Maryland state line criteria emissions benefit. That means you only count emissions benefits. You only count benefits if the emissions would have landed on residents of Maryland. So if they landed on somebody in New Jersey, or even somebody from Maryland visiting New Jersey, or they landed in Illinois or wherever, then those don't get counted currently.
And Joe, if I could jump in, you got a quick question from Dylan. Are the discount rates applied to all non-energy benefits, including air emissions, etc.?
Yes.
Excellent. Oh, got another one. How does the cost of carbon compare to a dollar per ton on a dollar per ton basis?
Yeah. So the number that we're using is really about around $40 per ton. And we use intensity factors that comes from EPA's guidance. It is their guidance based on the 5% discount rate. If we used a 3% discount rate, or we use their extreme case, which arguably is the one we should be using, the numbers would be much higher. So that is I think we're not as conservative as we could be, but we're pretty conservative on this. And actually I said 5%. I have to remind myself, I have to go back and look at the EPA numbers to see whether basically we're matching up our 3% real with the societal with a real discount rate, 3% real discount rate as prescribed in the EPA tables. And the criteria, the emissions intensity is an important factor here also. We see different, matter of fact, Dylan and I had a meeting on that a week or two ago, where Maryland Department of Environment has different emissions intensities, not only for the future and projected emissions intensities, but actually the emissions intensities for 2020 vary. And so then we to date have used PJM emissions intensity for 2020 and just flatlined it. And it actually worked, Dylan and I were talking about it, actually works out about equivalent to the MDE emissions since they go down. And that's with the MDE marginal emissions rates. An important point here is we use the PJM average marginal emissions rates. And that's always what we used. That's in fact always what I've used since the early 1990s when we were doing these calculations. There is an argument, and let me see, I think it's the next slide. I'm going to jump down here. So we've used average emissions rates. A year and a half ago or something was looking at this. Oh, you know what? I saw this ComEd draft study, and they had this picture in there citing Synapse from 2018, and basically arguing, and they were, Guidehouse was using a marginal emissions rate, and they showed this little picture, and I found it quite compelling. That basically the reductions from energy efficiency activities are occurring, somewhere along that curve. We're only doing 2%, reductions or something like that. I guess cumulatively, it gets bigger. But for a year, which is what we're talking about, the emissions reductions are, a slight shift in that curve. And so you're not really, I don't think the Empower programs are moving the curve down into the nuclear or the hydro. You're still in the coal, natural gas, gas oil, and natural gas combined turbines. So anyway, so I came around. In fact, I was kind of kicking myself, giving myself some dope slaps, that why was I using average? We clearly should be using marginal. And then I had started, talking around with people about it, including some of the people in this call, and who I respect immensely, and they're going, no way, should be using average. And so it's almost like, I'd say probably in terms of the people I've talked to about whether we should be using average or marginal, it's half and half. I'm still in the marginal camp. I think we should shift to marginal, but I can understand how that would not, how some people will argue otherwise. Let's see. I'm going back here because we got the criteria emissions benefit. Like I said, our Maryland state line, or Maryland criteria emissions benefit, which is actually a big benefit potentially, ends at the Maryland state line. If I go down here, and this is just showing for criteria benefits. If I these two, the blue bars are, if we count mid-Atlantic generation, that's within the PJM, but taking out of the mid-Atlantic sector, what generation is used to provide electricity. And the yellow bar is if we take Maryland, take Maryland generation. And so you can see just making that jump from Mid-Atlantic to Maryland. I'm not sure that's the right answer. Just saying that's I can see arguments for both ways, but just making that switch from a Maryland generation to the Mid-Atlantic, changes your criteria benefit in dollars per kilowatt hour by quite a bit. But the really big, interesting thing here for me anyway is how you define your boundaries. And with cost effectiveness, kind of that's cost effectiveness 101. What is your boundary? Is your boundary the state line? Is it the national line? Is it the world? Is it your household? Until you make that determination, it's kind of hard to do a cost effectiveness analysis. And it has not, really been delineated in Maryland. There's not been any formal discussions. That's something this group might want to take up. And as you can see, I've got a criteria benefit going from almost $0 per kilowatt hour up to 10 cents per kilowatt hour. And so in this graph, and so it's a very important question. And currently, like I said, we assume the emissions benefit as we assume an emissions benefit only if the emissions that are reduced as a result of the Maryland energy efficiency programs fall on someone in Maryland. If they fall on someone outside Maryland, we don't care. We are cold and calloused. We're going to ignore, that we ignore that. So we have an internal inconsistency. This is what I hate most, right? Is we're counting criteria emissions at the state line and counting GHG emissions for the world, benefits for the world, to the world. And if we treated CO2 emissions or GHG emissions the same way we do the criteria emissions, the benefit would be like, 0.086 cents per kilowatt hour or something like that. It's basically, it's very, actually, it's very low. Maryland is, is a very small percentage of the world population. If you wanted to base it on that, you could base it on GDP, I suppose, too. But if you were only going to count that, if you were going to take that, or arguably someone could say, I'm going to take that global societal cost of carbon and I'm going to multiply by the ratio of Maryland GDP to world GDP, something like that. I am not in any way advocating that. I don't think the Maryland elected officials would subscribe to that. In fact, just looking at the Maryland climate plan suggests that they're valuing at least GHG emissions pretty high. But I will note that in the IEP, in the international reports on the cost of climate change, a lot of the costs are associated with these criteria emissions. It's not just GHG, it's also the health impacts, increased mortality, increased morbidity that it occurs as a result of people breathing in small particles. So as you can see, I guess my message here is this is a huge issue for this group, or somebody is going to have to decide. And I would think you decide it before the potential study, because the potential study, could hinge on it, or at least you have, different scenarios that are included in the potential study, because you're going to get very different answers. And I know Jim Gravad has proposed, kind of backing in from the Maryland climate plan to the potential study, and that that could conceivably could make sense in the in this sense. Whatever goals you set are going to be, the utilities are going to feel obligated to meet them, and they and as I said, they will get stressed out if they can't meet the goal. So it's I think incumbent on someone, when you figure out what that goal should be, that you also include these key kind of assumptions in their ex post cost effectiveness and make it a policy. So for potential study, this is a hypothetical. So if for the potential study, we counted global social cost of carbon, and we counted a PJM-wide emissions benefit. We're going to get a much higher emissions benefit, which is therefore going to allow a lot more programs and measures to screen successfully. What would be really hard to take, I think, for the utilities anyway, would be then if on the back end we're doing cost effectiveness based on a emissions benefit that is based on a state line criteria emissions benefit. All right, hopefully that's to me it's a key point. I hope I got it across. Let me know if anybody's unclear. All right, jumping down, move on to the National Standard Practice Manual. I've been through this a few times, and I've talked with a number of the principal parties on it and thought about how we do it. And so I just have some comments on it. One of the principles: include all relevant impacts. And I will say we try, as I discussed earlier, we include a number of different non-energy benefits, some of which people say we shouldn't include, and some, and many people say we should be including additional ones. And so we've tried to be reasonable about it, but it's an open conversation, whether we're including all relevant impacts. We agree as a principle that uncertainty is not an excuse for assuming zero, that just because it's real, iffy when you go try to measure a comfort benefit, that doesn't mean that you assume it's zero. That goes back to my discussion around precision and bias. If we assume comfort is zero, given what we know about the driving forces behind people's investment in home performance and shell measures and HVAC systems, we would be precisely wrong. And the same with air emissions. If we assume zero, we're wrong. There's not much, in some ways, there's not much I can say beyond that. And then it comes down to, honest, smart people getting together and arguing and going back and forth and deciding how to estimate these things or what the benefit should be. Symmetry of costs and benefits, that's a principle. Again, we try. I think we include the participant incremental measure cost. And so I think we all agree it makes sense to include the comfort benefit as well as the lamp replacement benefit. And that's pursuant to that symmetry principle. Double counting, you'd obviously want to avoid double counting. We're ever watchful for that. I don't, if we have it, if somebody knows of double counting that we're doing, I surely want to know it. I'm not aware of it. The second, there should be secondary tests. And as I said, we report, all 5 California Standard Practice Manual tests, but the focus is on the TRC and the societal cost test. This one is a challenging one in Maryland, that our cost effectiveness analyses should align with the policy objectives. And, using gross savings in itself may be a departure from that. But that's, we've already had arguments around that. But generally, I think we certainly try. And as we, in terms of the emissions benefits, we have an emissions benefit. We'll try to address one that is going to become an ever more critical issue. And, but the National Standard Practice Manual in this sense is kind of agreeing with Jim. You need to go figure out what the policymakers are trying to achieve and then build your cost effectiveness, Jim Grad, I'm referring to, and build your cost effectiveness around that. By the way, that's not a recommendation from me. I'm just, these are observations, what I see out there. The carbon, also jiving with the policy objective, we have the carbon benefit. We also, there's no requirement that limited income programs be cost effective. So I would say that's also consistent with Maryland policy objectives. Comprehensive, transparent documentation. God, I think we work real hard at this. I don't And I'll show you in a few minutes. I'll show you the website where people can go and see the the reports. But there is so many spreadsheets, and we're in the process of the verification right now. And the evaluators work in so many very large spreadsheets. A lot of Excel, but also in SAS or various statistical programming stuff that is harder for anybody really to go look at, for a regular stakeholder to go look at. And so I would say our transparency is the product of our process of people going back and forth. In other words, if the Maryland stakeholders don't trust me, don't trust staff, don't trust Kitson McNeil or the OPC folks, then that's where it breaks down. I can provide most, as long as there's no personally identifiable information in the files, I can provide, any of the things that we look at to anybody who wants to do it. I doubt anybody is going to want to look too long, but we can. I'm happy to have that discussion. So in that sense, I'd say we are transparent. We are willing to be transparent as people want us to be. All right. Consistent with other distributed energy resources, I'd say on that front, there's been a little effort until recently. I think Amanda gave a presentation at the last meeting, Amanda Best, on the EV cost effectiveness discussions. That's a good example where Amanda intentionally got me involved so that I could be talking to the people from Gable about what they were proposing for the utilities, and talk about whether it was consistent or inconsistent with what we're doing over here, and whether there were any huge whether I saw any huge gaps or issues with what they were doing. There are plenty. When you go and look at EV, in a nutshell, there's a number of other challenges too. But when you're developing cost effectiveness for EV, one of the big arguments has been, well, wait, if we include a RIM test, if that was our primary test for EV, right, the rate impact test, we're going to look good because the electric, the EVs are expected to mostly charge off hours. You're going to have more kilowatt hours to spread across the same amount of generation. Therefore, rates will go down. But there, if they just ran the EV program through the Empower cost effectiveness model, and we reported an EV program out the same way we report out all the other programs, so we just act like they're the same, the EV would not look very good. Now, it may be the case that is how you should report it, and EV shouldn't look good. I don't know. But my main point, I'm not opining on that. My point is that they're really different animals, and it's hard to line these up in a way that everybody feels like all the information is on the table and people are being able to make informed decisions, which is ultimately the objective of our cost effectiveness. All right, here, I don't need to spend any time with this, but this is where I just want everyone to know, and this is a very partial list, but you can see, just a lot of measures and programs that we look at as part of the program, and all of them have their own little tricks and tweaks and things that we got to do. We also have many masters. One is to determine goal attainment, and that's based on currently and through 2023 is based on first year gross megawatt hour savings. The goals are pretty ambitious. It ignores program influences. We don't have to worry about whether the program actually caused the measures to change. That gets us into some arguments with the utilities when they're trying to meet goal. Naturally, they're going to build programs around the metrics that are provided to them, and so it can get a lot. That's where you get the CVR that Jim Gravad has expressed concerns about over the years. You get there's even the ESRPP program, Energy Star Retail Products Platform, where you have very low cost effectiveness, like 0.05 cost effectiveness, and very low net to gross. In those cases, they still can get decent gross savings from the program. And so it's hard to blame them for going and doing whatever they got to do to meet goal. So the other master is proving PJM savings. I don't get into this. The utility evaluators deal with the utilities directly without input from me. PJM has its own protocols, which are absolutely different than some of our protocols for the Empower programs. But this is something the utilities have to deal with, and they have to deal with also. They got settlements and all that stuff, and so if we're evaluating and somehow openly challenge, we don't want to be in a position where we're openly challenging their PJM bids. Having said that, I'm currently in some significant discussions with all of the demand response utilities, and just figuring out what exactly is our policy for evaluating for the purposes of Empower, and what we're expecting next year in terms of a full-blown Empower evaluation report. To date, the utilities have focused on PJM reports, but we're also going to put them on the hook for the Empower programs, for the DR savings. The cost effectiveness is used to inform portfolio decisions. So that's a big deal. It's probably the thing I most focus on, is just making sure that we're giving good information back to stakeholders in the commission each year. And then to a lesser extent, there's some measure level cost effectiveness. It informs program design to the extent that we're providing measure level cost effectiveness. But I'm not sure. It's not clear to me how much the utilities really and ICF and other implementers really lean on that, but on our results. But it's there if they want it. I can't see I didn't number my slides. I don't know how close I am to the end, but I think it's pretty good, pretty close. Still okay, Judge?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So there's many methods, many assumptions. I already said this before, but let me just give you the high level list. Engineering calculations. A lot of that comes out of a technical reference manual. We collectively update that manual on a frequent basis. We were doing it annually. Now we're doing it once every program cycle. But then in between our TRM updates, we have an interim supplements catalog. I will give you the URL for that in a few minutes, but so that we can address any issues that could include corrections that need to be made to the latest TRM. It could include new measures. There's a lot of, especially right now, we got probably 20 new measures on the table that we don't have measure protocols for. As soon as we're done with our verification, we'll be turning to that. So we, that's a lot of what we spend our time on, just trying to get those as right as rain. Then bill analyses are also used. That's used for the home performance program, uses a pre-post bill analysis, no non-participant comparison group. The behavioral program does have a non-participant control group. We use surveys. The surveys are used for the net to gross ratios. But for the program, what would you have done? But also to verify that measures were actually installed as the utilities claimed. So that's and then also there's pretty much always we take that opportunity to get some feedback on whether the participants like the program. So that's some feedback that goes to the utilities. Sales data. The sales data. This is the for the ESRPP program and upstream lighting, where we don't know who the customers are. So we use regression models based on market shares for the different types of measures, pre and post. And in the case of lighting, comparing to, as I said earlier, non-program states. So there's a control group in it. Then there's some simulation modeling, in particular with new construction programs. That's where we use that. And those are using, if anybody's in the building modeling area, the models are pretty familiar. All right. So we have many moving parts, and when I say these are things that are used in the evaluations and in the cost effectiveness, We have Empower guidance documents. This is a strategic, one is the strategic guidance. We generally update that every year. The latest is, I think the latest is from December of last year. And again, I'll give you the website, the URL for that. That walks through what the processes are, how decisions are made. For example, we have an evaluation advisory group that consists of MIA, OPC, all the utilities evaluators, DHCD, the commission staff, me, or my team, and so it tells how we all relate to each other and what our roles and responsibilities are. It also goes through the cost effectiveness, things that are where it gives some more specifics on benefits and different things that are included in the different tests. So that chapter is useful, can be useful to people. We have a number of different, it talks about gross savings calculations, talks about net savings expectations. And then usually there's a chapter towards the end where we got some big special topic that we're wrestling with. And often that evolves around, how and under what conditions are we locking things down for gross savings. We always have a lot of discussion around that.
Excuse me, Joe. Dylan asked a question in the chat. Can you say more about the extent to which we use the Mid-Atlantic TRM versus have expectations or other sources for measures? Is it 95% or 70% or something else?
Yeah, for the engineering calculations, I would say it's at least 95%. And I'll add the Mid-Atlantic TRM is not really a Mid-Atlantic TRM anymore. It's a Maryland TRM. And even when it was the Mid-Atlantic TRM, Maryland, we have always been heavily involved in from the beginning in the development and updates of the Mid-Atlantic TRM. A lot of the inputs, hours of use for lighting, the full load hours for HVAC, and a bunch of other stuff. What the percentage of HVAC projects that are counted as early replacement versus time of sale. All that kind of detail. Smart thermostats. We developed the smart thermostats protocol. So all that kind of detail, has come out of Maryland. So if it's in the TRM, there's really no inconsistency with what we do unless there's something in the interim supplements catalog where we've gone and changed it or made revisions to it. All right, we do evaluation plans every 3 years. We will be jumping on that in the next month or two for 21 to 23. And this is really just to make sure that we're all in sync in terms of our expectations for evaluations. It also allows the evaluators to then, when they provide their evaluation memos, they can be much more summary form. They don't need to go describe every year all the methods they're using because they were already described in the evaluation docs. So we, when we're verifying the evaluation reports, we go through the evaluation plans and make sure that they're doing what they said they'd do, or talking to them if they're not, and just figuring out what's going on. And so that's an important process. Also, that's where we decide what our special studies are going to be. There's always some major topics that we need to deal with. I would say smart thermostats was probably the biggest issue in the last cycle. We just got the smart thermostat study results recently. That's one of those things that will be in the ISC, Dylan, rather than in the, we will no longer be using the Mid-Atlantic TRM smart thermostat savings percentages. We have new ones that came out of this, out of the smart thermostat study. And so that's an example where we would not, I don't think we have any intention of going and updating the TRM version 10 to reflect this new smart thermostat study. Rather, we will put it in our interim service supplements catalog, and the Drew Durkees and Ruths of the world can go look in there to see what's been changed since the TRM, or they can just call us and we'll talk them through it. Verification of evaluations. This is a big part of what we do each year, especially summer into now. We're wrapping it up now, and that's a lot of QA/QC, ensuring compliance with Empower guidance, as well as the Uniform Methods Project guidance and anything else out there. And again, that they're evaluating in accordance with their evaluation plans, that any topics that we've talked about, which are many, that need to be reflected in the evaluation are reflected. And then a lot of ad hoc stuff. There's about, at least 3 issues that come up a day that just in that ad hoc category where we got to go have a discussion. Sometimes those discussions take a few minutes. Sometimes those discussions take a few years. Here are the people, and this is also explained in the strategic guidance. So the evaluation work group, as I said, there's the list there. So it's staff and OPC and the utilities and my team and the utility evaluators, OPC and MIA. If others want to engage on particular topics, we have we don't have an exclusionary policy. In fact, the EAG, we're just working on EMV work group behavioral disaggregation document for the commission due Friday. And so Oracle was in that meeting and a number of other people. So we're not I wouldn't call us an exclusive group, but I can tell you most people do not want to sit through most of these meetings. In fact, most of the people who do have to sit through these meetings don't want to sit through these meetings. And we have I said weekly meetings here, but that was actually we're having weekly meetings in the spring. Right now we're not having weekly meetings. We're basically in ad hoc mode. We will probably, once we get in, a lot of things like the emerging measure protocols, we can have small group. We don't need to convene the whole EAG. We can meet with the people who care about it. So, but if anyone feels like they're out of the loop, this comes back to the transparency. If people feel like you need to be more, you want to be more in the loop on all this, you just got to call me and let me know, and I'll put you on some lists. Let's see. I already talked about me. The utility evaluators. The utility evaluators are the ones who do the really hard work. I get to, act imperial and all sorts of things, beat up on them. But they're the ones that have to go really figure out how to do stuff. And
excuse me, Joe, you got another question from Dylan. Okay. Can you describe cost effectiveness testing with regard to non-Empower funded savings that count towards goals? Then the next question is, do utility evaluators use protocols that you advise on as they do for Empower funded programs? Do you report independently to the commission on those savings in the same way?
Yeah. I think there's, let me answer what I heard, and then you can tell me if I need to answer more. I think the examples of what Dylan would be talking about are CVR savings. Those savings are counted towards the Empower goals. I have evaluated them and the utility evaluators to the extent that we looked at it and said, well, their methods seem robust. The big question with CVR is whether you assume that the savings from a CVR program last 1 year or last 10 years. And historically, a lot of jurisdictions have done CVR programs in their ex-ante, including in Maryland, in their ex-ante cost effectiveness. When they're making a case to the commission, they'll claim, well, this is.
Joe, you're kind of fading out a little bit on us. Last thing I got was when utilities are making the presentation to the commission. All right. We'll give Joe a minute to see if he can come back to us. Joe, you there, sir? Joe?
Hey, Chuck, I just texted Joe that he froze on us and we couldn't hear him anymore. So I think he just signed out. I think he's going to try to sign back in.
Aye, thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Excuse me, Judge. This is Sammy Kawaja.
Yes, sir.
I apologize if I missed this through one of the emails, but can you just tell us what the rest of the meeting is going to involve
You?
while we're waiting? Just Cadmus?
Yeah, it's just you, sir.
All
Yeah.
right, fantastic. So I get, what, 3 hours?
As much time as you like, sir.
Thank you.
No problem. All right, why don't we just plan on taking a short break while we wait on Joe to come back and finish up his presentation.
Hey, Chuck, I just talked with Joe and he lost his Wi-Fi. So he's trying to get it back on so we can continue.
All right, I appreciate that, Dan.
So I don't know if we need maybe a few more minutes, probably a few more minutes.
That's fine. No, I appreciate the update and everyone's patience.
Okay.
Hello, Chuck. Sorry, Judge.
Sure, fine, sir.
All right. Should I continue?
Yeah, please. I think where we lost you is you were talking about CVR and when the utilities present to the commission, and you were talking about 10 years versus 1 year, and you faded out after that.
Okay, sorry about that. I have
No
no idea
problem.
what's going on. So answering Dylan's question. So for DR, the utilities will be doing a full-blown evaluation report for 2021. For 2020 and last year, actually, I have just worked with them to go through their calculations, figure out where we disagree on things, and kind of line it up. And I've got some templates now that I'm using to make sure that their savings as reported line up with the documentation that they're providing. I will say in most cases, the documentation, it can be somewhat dated. So there's some of their inputs are coming from some dated documents, and so we'll be discussing that. But so it's across. So the short answer, Dylan, is there's a number of savings towards Empower currently counted that don't get normally and routinely evaluated. Was there another dimension to your question?
I just, Judge, I'll just come off mute. It's probably easier. That's very helpful, Joe. When is the DR report? You said for 2021, meaning it'll be completed sometime in 2022 using 2021 data, or meaning it'll be completed at the end of the year?
Yeah. So the 2021 report, well, we get, they're really, there's generally no events after at least November or something.
Right.
So we can move a little more quickly with those reports, I think. And so I would, I would think by spring, well, I don't want to pin anybody down on it, Dylan, but it's a fair question, and I can, I'll discuss it with the utilities and the evaluators and see what's reasonable and let you know.
Okay.
But I don't think there'll be as much lag as with the energy efficiency programs, where we don't really have all the data until December 31st, or until a month after December 31st of the year.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That was a helpful answer.
Okay. Let's see. I think, okay, I'm getting close to the end. It's kind of a throwaway slide in some ways, but it's like one of the challenges with the valuation is, what battle are you going to fight? Are you trying to be accurate? Are you trying to be credible? How do you maintain credibility? For me, that's a key, it's a requisite for what we do. I want the Jim Gravats and the Kits and McNeils and the everybody to trust, that we're keeping the foxes out of the hen house, and having some real hard conversations all the time. And then evaluation cost, this is always a challenge, because you can over evaluate and you can under evaluate. And I think we've got it pretty close to right. I haven't heard complaints, but people could argue in either direction. And then we always have urgent, the question of urgency, as Dylan's asking about the DR and how quick we can get it. That's, it's always a question. We could do, use half a year's data to evaluate a program year, and you just get, you get a different result, that's for sure. But you can, in some ways, get reasonable results. I will say at least it used to be, the programs are a little more stable than they are now in terms of new measures and that sort of thing, that I would be reluctant to take a half a year of data now, because things will change in the second half of the year, and you'd get a totally different result. So, and the commission has always wanted calendar year results. In fact, that was a big challenge for us. Our history, PJM has a evaluation year of June 1 to May 31st. So that's when they want all their evaluations. So the utilities are meeting that master, but the commission was never really interested in going into a PJM evaluation year. They wanted the calendar year results, but that creates some complexity and challenges for us.
Hey, Joe, two quick ones. Can you put your slides back up on the
Yep.
I guess the preview, make it a little, thank you, sir. And then I'm not sure, did you see Dr. McNeil's question in the chat? Any update on differences in CVR costs for the utilities?
I have not seen anything, Kitson. I think it's still an open question. What Kitson's referring to is when we looked at the CVR program, I think BGE, claimed millions of dollars spent each year for CVR. The PHI companies were spending 100,000 each year, and they're claiming, comparable savings relative to their size. And, so that was, one of the things we could just never get a handle on. And I think the commission acknowledged that, when we sent our report and said, that's one of the things that needs to get dealt with. But I did not personally have a specific, I don't think, Dan, maybe I'm forgetting something, but I don't think there was any specific direction provided from the commission for us to go do anything. And they were saying basically they're going to take the 1 year, they're taking the 1 year savings, in which case it doesn't matter, right? If that's an open question, then we need to dig back in on that cost question to attribute savings from each year to cost incurred in that year. But if the decision is really, at least for the time being, to just use the assume first year savings every year towards gross savings, then there's not really much point in us doing anything.
Right. Hey, Joe, it's Dan. Yeah, that's right. The commission's using first year savings for this current cycle.
Okay. So this is an issue for the future programming. Well, I'm sure Jim Gravatt will make it an issue if no one else does. And so that will be a topic of discussion and a challenge, an analytical challenge. I personally, in writing up the report back to the commission, I was a bit more equivocal than I would have liked, and I'm sure that Jim would like. But I couldn't analytically, at least, I couldn't find a clear answer, that made sense. I could see it a number of different ways. Let's see. So I don't think there's any. I think I've kind of hit all of these points. Basically we're just we're digging in on stuff left and right. Here's the. I think I also put it on the last slide for Empower Guidance and Reports. Here's a URL that you might want to go look at. This you'll find the strategic guidance. You'll find the TRM, the Interim Supplements catalog. You'll find evaluation reports going back from the beginning, I think. And verification reports going back to the beginning. So it's a good first stop shop anyway to take a look at stuff. This I don't need to hit this, but just suffice. We have a more or less clear. We have to deviate from it, but more or less clear order of primacy in terms of the documents that we use to make decisions. Ultimately, a lot of the time, it just comes down to discussions among EAG members. And I already mentioned this. I think I've talked about all these things. And the TRM, I've talked about that's where we lock down stuff for gross savings, along with the interim service catalog to the extent we can. And I also said some of the things that are not locked down. We don't lock down custom savings or behavioral or home performance or CHP. They're too different every time. So we can't really TRM them and decide that we're going to have parameters that will be used and should be changed. And like I said, we do not lock down the cost effectiveness parameters, the net to gross, the early replacement, incremental cost.
Joe, you got another question from Dylan,
Okay.
Another TRM type question. How well set up are we to handle savings calculations for a bigger emphasis on load management or load shifting measures like like storage or managed EV charging or a ramp up with controlled water heating?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure how to answer that. I mean, the EV group is developing, and the utilities and staff, and a lot of people are involved with that, developing the cost effectiveness protocol for electric vehicles. And so I suppose once, if the commission approves that, I think they're supposed to be finished at the end of the year, right, Dan? if that gets approved, I don't know how that feeds into us. It will be a challenge. It will be a fuel shifting. We can handle it, right? We know what, for examples of where we have fuel shifting currently would be CHP, right? So we track the amount of natural gas that goes into that CHP generation, and then that gets juxtaposed to the electric generation that is avoided. Electric costs are avoided. We had a situation with BGE back in, I think it was like 2013 or something, where BGE was trying to run some connections for natural gas to some residential customers and wanted to run those costs through Empower. I think the commission, we didn't have to deal with it because the commission ultimately rejected it, if I recall correctly. I could be wrong on that. But it will be a challenge. For one, there could be different net to gross. In other words, the extent, the counterfactual of the customer could be different from the natural, for natural gas than for electricity. So, we just we'll have to do a lot of parsing on it. And you also got to decide your baseline. We just had, with Josh and Washington Gas had a discussion a few weeks ago about their pilot study for gas source heat pumps and what the baseline should be. And so you could have a baseline that assumes, well, the gas customer would have replaced their 80 AFUE furnace with an 81 AFUE furnace. It's legal. Or you could compare it to a condensing 94% AFUE furnace. Or, and this is where this goes to your question, or you could compare that gas heat pump to an electric air source heat pump. And that electric air source heat pump could be an efficient one. It could be a baseline, et cetera. And so, I will say it's not trivial. I'm not that worried about it. I think we'll figure it out, but it will be a major topic of conversation and probably controversy. And we are not currently, we have not walked through all those issues yet. I think that's the short answer to your question.
Oh my gosh.
I'm just going through these, some of these slides I left in here so people can, people have a reference if they want later to remind what all we do. But the Uniform Methods Project is out of the National Labs and DOE, and basically for a bunch of different types of measures provides guidance on how things should be evaluated. It's not, you cannot go use a UMP guidance and then evaluate just on that basis. There will still be a bunch of decisions about different assumptions and things that you'll have to deal with. But at least gives us a good start. And there are a few situations where we're not quite compliant with the Uniform Methods Protocol, but in general, we are. It is one of the questions that we ask ourselves, each year. Are we doing it the way the UMP says we should? And then the International Project Measurement and Verification Protocol, the IPMVC, I haven't had to say it so long, the IPMVP. And this was really designed more for energy services companies who are going in and doing projects and want to compare before and after projects for the most part. There's, a whole lot that's, again, that it does not tell us, but we do, where it's applicable, lean on this document also to make sure we're complying with it. Then we have our interim supplements catalog. This fills in the TRM stuff. I'm going to do here. Okay. I'm just going to go jump on my link. Can y'all see my screen here? Or do I need to?
I can see it, but.
Okay. Does it say Empower Maryland evaluation?
It does not. It says interim supplements catalog.
Give me one. Yeah, give me 1 second. Sorry. Now, this is useful because people keep asking me, and I want to make sure people know where to go. And I'm very close to being done. Sorry for taking so long here. Let's see.
When you're ready, Joe, I got a question. Somebody's got a question.
Okay, let me get
No
this up.
problem.
Otherwise, I get all confused. Okay, I'm just going to share my entire screen. That'll make it easy for me. All right, so this is the URLs in the slides that I sent today. If you go, you'll see 4 categories: the evaluation and verification reports. These are the annual reports that the evaluation reports that the utilities do. The utility evaluators do. The verification reports are our verification of those reports. I would say that there's only been, I believe, 2 years where we have actually rejected savings from the evaluators, and the reason for that. Kind of looks like we're all in cahoots, but it's actually not. It's because we do all our discussions over the summer. So by the time they come out with the evaluation reports, we're all in sync, and we make every effort to do that. And there have been few exceptions where we've stepped away from that. In the verification report, we do always provide talk about some issues, and sometimes we really lean into those issues. That was last year. Was for the lighting estimated useful lives, and as a result of our complaining about what was being done, and we weren't able to get agreement with the utilities. The commission ordered us to go set up a work group and work through it, and so we did that this spring. The verification reports, even though the numbers are always the same as the evaluators, or except in a few exceptions. That doesn't mean that we're just passing through their savings. We have evaluation guidance and TRMs, and in this section,
Joe, is that something you could throw that link to all those documents into the chat? There was a request for that, sir.
Oh, okay. It's in the slides. Let me see.
It's in the slides. Okay.
Yeah, it is in the slides. Look on the back slide, the last slide. It's on 2 slides actually.
Well, I think Dylan just got it.
Okay. Yeah, Dylan, if you could chat it, that would be great. Otherwise, I'll screw something up and lose you again.
And then Julie has a question whenever you're ready for a good stopping point, sir.
I'm fine, Julie.
Thanks so much. Sorry, this is like kind of taking us back to an earlier part of the conversation, but so the discussion of the differences in considering like climate change and greenhouse gas emissions on the cost effectiveness side versus like the potential studies. I was curious if anything in the recent legislation about directing the commission to consider climate change pushes like the approach towards like one resolution or another, and like the second part of the question being any of those guidance documents that you just presented, like the UMP, do those provide any sort of guidance on that topic?
Yeah. So I would say the UMP is not going to be much help with this. Really, the guidance that most people turn to is EPA guidance, and I think the Biden administration is coming out with new guidance. If it hadn't already been released, it's coming soon, which likely will be higher than the old guidance. It's kind of not for me to answer, Julia, whether how the emissions benefits and how emissions are calculated in Maryland. I can point out all the different ways you could, and I can highlight. I can give you what it means. Tell you what. Try to give you a sense of the implications of those different policies. But ultimately, they're policy decisions, right? If you even the emissions boundary is a policy decision. I would have said a year ago that using marginal emissions should not be a policy decision. It was, to me, clear analytically. It made sense, but but so many people have pushed back on it. When I say so many, like 4 or 5, but they were all, pretty involved people. I'm not, I think that's a policy decision too.
Yeah, that's fair. Thanks. Also, not for me to decide. I think it's a really interesting question and something that I'm glad you talked about because I had not really thought about it. So thanks.
Yeah. Well, if you know, I'm always looking at commission orders to see if they say from now on Joe Loper makes all decisions, and when they do that, then trust I will come up with the answers. But that hasn't happened yet.
I'm not going to hold my breath. Yeah.
All right. So there's strategic guidance. This has all, you know, all the back, the current, the latest, and the back versions. So you might want to glance at, at least look at the most recent one. That's a pretty good starting point for understanding what we do if people want to get a little more in depth here. And then the TRMs are here, TRM V10 being the latest. Let's see. Then here, let me just show you quickly the interim supplements catalog. So this is, like I said, this is filling in where the TRM did not contain a measure or was had not dealt with some topic, or we found a mistake in the TRM, different things. And so we locked down the TRM for 3 years. The TRM V10 will be used for 21 to 23, but we needed to give ourselves an out in case things came up. And so if you go in here, there's a pending and a final sheet. I can't see the bottom. Oh, there it is. Okay. So this is approved. So these are items that have been approved. Come up in just a second. These have been approved since basically, you know, the beginning of the year. And the list goes down, you know, it's probably 25 items, I guess. And then we have pending. The decision process for most of these, for things that are, for items that are not, you know, we don't expect any real controversy around, basically the EAG in the strategic guidance has agreed that as long as Brent Barquette and I agree, then we can go ahead and put it in here. And then we always report it out to the EAG, but we don't need to go to the EAG and get a lot of input on it. And then, of course, any issues that we think might be controversial to someone, then we definitely you know, loop them in and make sure that they're comfortable with whatever we're doing. So that's you know, that's our process for the for this ISC. We always there's, you know, in most of these, even I'd say almost even the most trivial, there's quite a bit of discussion that goes into them just to make sure we got it right. And then I think it's all the evaluation reports. I think that's it. Oh, then there's some stuff on, I'm not sure, I don't remember what this is. This may be legacy non-energy benefits discussion. Oh, this is a report. Sorry, this is a report that was done, that we did in 2015 for the commission, that it was a collaborative process with staff and MIA and OPC and all the utilities. And we did 3 scenarios, just so you know. We did 3 scenarios for the commission. So, for example, if I recall correctly, for the air emissions benefit, we had a 0.2 cents. That was our low. That was called business as usual, unfortunately, in the process. And then there was our medium, which was, I think it was 1 cent, and then the high was 2 cents. And I had you know, explanation. It's basically largely around this boundary issue that allowed me to go to those different places. And the commission, even though that was a pretty liberal commission, it's before the new commission, they chose the 0.2, the business as usual. And so that's just by way of background. But these are the reports from which they drew that. All right, am I back? Is my slide back on the screen? I'll go to the finish line here.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Oh, good. I'm glad to be done too. I'm as glad to be done as you are. So here's contact information. Here, there's the URL for that website we were just looking at the bottom. I'm happy to talk to any of you anytime. This is what I do. And so don't hesitate, and I can help dig down with you on stuff or whatever you want to do.
All right. Thank you very much for the presentation, sir. Anybody have any additional questions for Joe? Dr. McNeil.
Morning, everyone. Kitson McNeil. Well, good afternoon. Kitson McNeil, Maryland Energy Administration. Thanks for the presentation, Joe. Just a quick question regarding, as we have looked to broaden some of the goals and the scope, I guess, of the energy efficiency programs going forward, have you noticed in other states that have done so that they're utilizing some of the other tests a little bit more to provide some additional information? Or do you think some of the other, not the TRC or the societal cost test, but the other three that were mentioned, do they provide any benefit in a broadened scope of evaluating programs?
Well, I would say they always have provided some additional perspective. Even if the TRC is the primary test, it's useful, if you're trying to figure out what your programs should be and how much program to do, to look at the impacts on the various parties, including rates. Kitson, that's often your concern. And in terms of the direction that other jurisdictions are going, Sammy could speak to that better than me. I'm not aware of people going to the RIM test or going in that direction outside Maryland. If anything, they're going more to societal and broadening the scope of benefits, and particularly focused on that emissions benefit and the perhaps a lower discount rate.
Okay.
Does that make sense, Sammy, or is that accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. To my knowledge, the only jurisdiction that still considers RIM seriously is like West Virginia, I think, and they have pretty much no DSM programs to speak of.
Yeah, this is one of the challenges here, right? You've got a climate plan that basically included Empower continuing at 2% a year, for a number of years. I don't remember how many, whether it was 2 program cycles or 1 or whatever. And then to boot, they have a heat pump, a huge heat pump transition, right? And which is getting a lot of attention here, and of course, and other places. So, it kind of comes back to who's your master, right? If your master is the elected officials of Maryland, right, as represented by this state assembly, do you then take whatever their goal, whatever they said was right, or whatever their delegated party to say what was right, in this case, I think, right, Maryland Department of Environment, and take that, that is the goal. You apply that here, and then figure out what do you need to do with your cost effectiveness to get your potential to that, whatever that is, right? And it's kind of backwards. It sounds funny, people like, I think Kitson and I both, kind of like cringe a little at it, but there is so much uncertainty in all this, and ultimately our elected officials, for better or worse, we live in a democracy, right? They have to make these kind of decisions. And so, one could argue that we need to, I think the state assembly has actually maybe argued that recently, that the Maryland Commission needs to develop its policies in accordance with, what the state assembly is. And the best way to, again, what you don't want to do is have a very weak cost effectiveness here, right? One that, doesn't get you to that goal, but then give everybody that goal. And then they go do the goal, and later on you Kitson and everybody else will be going, hey, these programs aren't cost effective. What are you thinking? What are you doing? When actually cost effectiveness is part of a policy process. There's often no right answer. It's really, people getting into the room and trying to come up with answers that, are consistent with their ultimately their society's views. That's what we're dealing with here.
Thank you.
If I may just raise sort of a philosophical question and get on my soapbox for just a minute. I apologize to begin with. So, it's like, seems to me like we've made a decision to move in the direction of reducing emissions. Yet we do cost effectiveness analysis of comparing an option of moving away from emissions to staying with the current condition. It seems to me like really the right approach to cost effectiveness is to compare two ways of getting us there, not the status quo to the approach that reduces emissions. So we should be comparing different ways of getting us to the right place and not use current avoided cost as the basis for determining what is and what is not cost effective. I think we do it all wrong. But I'm one of those people that does it wrong, so I can't complain too much.
Yeah. Why do you say when you say that? So I understand you build on your avoided costs, your avoided energy and capacity costs, and you add a bunch of other stuff to it. Why do you say that's what part is wrong in that?
Well, I think because that's the status quo that we don't want. And what we should be doing is comparing, there's two options, A and B, to get to where you want. Compare A to B, not A to existing conditions. To me, that makes more sense. You compare a renewable option perhaps to EVs or renewable options to energy efficiency. Don't compare efficiency to supply side. And that's the way we've been doing it for decades, is we compare demand side options and DERs to supply side options. But we're saying we don't want supply side options. We should be comparing different paths of getting to where we want to go.
Well, here's a related note that's going to frustrate some people. Pretty much all of the emissions intensity projections go down. MDEs go down, right? And so one question, in fact, I had this conversation with Chris from MDE, Hoagland from MDE, and Cindy Asordo, a couple months ago. Do you assume that all those programs that are in the climate plan are going to happen? That you're going to have that fuel switch, you're going to have those EVs, you're going to have all those things that are being called for, you're going to have that HVAC, those heat pumps. If you do, your generation mix changes quite a bit. Your emissions intensity can go down as well. And if there's the renewable, especially if there's the renewable build, right? And that's not going to help energy efficiency cost effectiveness, right? In other words, if you take into account all those other things, and then you got to decide. Well, you should take account all those other things, but you got to decide whether you believe them or not. This, the Energy Information Administration, when it does its National Energy Modeling System, Annual Energy Outlook, it will not count policies that are, kind of just said somebody wants. They only count policy once it's law, and that would be one way to do it. In that case, you probably still have a lot. No, well, then you got to decide whether the climate plan, 30% reduction by, I can't remember what it is, but 50% by 2030 or whatever, is you have to decide whether that's reasonable or not. Because we've seen plenty of goals and people talk about doing things, whether it's legislatively mandated or not, that doesn't really happen. And so if you assumed it's all going to happen, then your energy efficiency has less bang for its buck. You do less efficiency, and then you still don't get those other actions. Then you're really in trouble.
Dylan, you have a question, sir?
Yeah, or maybe a little bit more of a comment. Again, Dylan Voorhees with VEIC. I think it does depend a little bit, as Joe, you've been saying, on sort of how do you understand, and this is part of what I think, Sammy, you're suggesting too, how do you understand the purpose of the cost effectiveness test? Is it to determine whether or not something is worth doing, sort of in an absolute sense, or is it to help distinguish between choices, like we should do this as opposed to that because that is more cost effective? And it depends a lot on the framework. Are we sort of taking as given that the General Assembly wants Empower to achieve X amount of energy efficiency? In fact, they're relying on it for fulfillment of a plan, in which case, our job is to decide which is the most sort of cost-effective way of getting that result or not. So I think that there really depends a lot on the purpose of the testing. And I think given the state's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act commitments, I would sort of tend to agree with Sammy. The question is sort of what is the best way to get there? But it's made more difficult because Empower, we have to decide where we draw the lines around Empower. Do we just assume the grid is getting cleaner because that's policy? Or are we participating in the larger determination about whether Empower reductions are cheaper than supply side reductions? So it's kind of a long-winded comment to say, it depends on our purpose in assigning a cost effectiveness test.
Hallelujah. That's all I can say, Dylan. And that's been the challenge. That's been the challenge from the beginning of Empower. I mean, I don't know that the gross savings, gross megawatt hour goal was necessarily pursuant to objectives. And
and I think with the potential transition to a greenhouse gas goal, we create a more explicit opportunity for Empower to be playing a specific role, a more quantified role in achieving a overall statewide policy that I don't think existed sort of on the megawatt hour side. There wasn't a grand plan for, X achievement of megawatt hour reductions, but to some extent there is on the.
You muted yourself, Dylan.
Yeah, sorry. I've got my finger on the button because I've got a noisy kid here with me. But I think there is enough.
Make her watch the meeting. That'll put her to sleep.
I was just saying, I think that I don't know if it's easier, but it's not easy, but I think it is more feasible to understand how Empower fits within the larger GHG side plan for the state. That's appealing from a kind of policy cohesion perspective that says we're trying to achieve an absolute amount of GHG reductions, and we want to determine the lowest cost path for that. And we want to have Empower contribute to that in a quantifiable way. And I don't think that wasn't the framework for a megawatt hour based target in the past.
All right. Thank you, sir. And Emily commented a little while ago that she was involved in Joe's comment that they've been looking at the issue. I think that you had referenced with MDE, sir. And she said, in a low emissions future, traditional energy efficiency will look worse and electrification will look better. So, all right. Anybody else? Any questions or comments? All right, Joe, thank you very much for your presentation. I really appreciate it. And I hope everyone found it useful, and I'm sure you'll use it to base your comments on how we should go cost effectiveness wise in your comments next week. Doc, before I turn it over to you, how long ballpark do you think your presentation will be?
25 minutes, 30 minutes tops.
Okay. All right. I want to be mindful of everyone's time. Do we want to press ahead, or do we want to take a quick break, a lunch break? All right. If nobody, Doc, if you're ready to go, nobody's saying anything one way or the other. So if you're ready, I'm sorry, sir.
No, I'm sorry. All right. I said perfect.
Oh, okay. Julia said onward. So
excellent.
She's the only one who voted. So democracy at work.
Excellent. Well, this was exhausting, and I mean that in a really good way. I mean, Joe has managed to include every controversial evaluation topic into a 20-slide presentation. Kudos to you. That is incredible. You will love our presentation compared to Joe's, not only because our slides are a whole lot prettier than his, but also our presentation really has very little controversy. It involves multiplication, and addition. That's it. That's all we do. So in terms of a quick reminder of what this study was about, it was conducted to estimate the energy efficiency potential. I'm sorry, I'm going to start presenting here. And share. All right, I hope you can see it.
We can, sir.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. So
I see your calendar invite.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. I mean, I can see your screen. I mean,
that's not what I intended. I apologize. Let me see how do I change that? Display settings. I am so sorry. This is what happens when old people get involved in technology. Now, do you see it?
Not yet, sir.
Okay, my bad.
Okay, now we've got energy burden distribution by FPL. Is that what
that is correct? That is exact.
Sammy, it's on presentation mode. It's not on your actual presentation.
It's not?
Like we see the next slide and the notes and stuff.
All right, Scott, why don't you do it? I'll speak for a minute and then I'll let you present.
If you just change the display settings up top, like that should switch it.
Display settings there. Okay.
Well, yeah.
There we go.
You're good.
Fantastic. Thank you. Teamwork. Again, as a quick reminder, this study was conducted to estimate the energy efficiency potential among Maryland low-income population. And in order to achieve this goal, we conducted what we call a top-down analysis to be differentiated from the traditional bottom-up analysis, where you start with the individual measures and the available technologies, and you determine, what is technically feasible, and then from that you chip at it a little bit and say, not all of it is economic, so what is economically feasible, and you keep going down to what is really achievable. So we don't quite do that. The math is a bit similar, but the approach is slightly different. In order to do the top-down analysis that we've done, we really needed two things. We needed number of units, and in this case, the number of units is number of households, and we needed some average savings per household. So obviously, different households have different types of measures that get installed on them, but we use an overall average based on data from 2013 to 2020, evaluated results from the DHCD programs. So we needed data we want to take the state, Maryland, and divide it into individual buckets, if you will, and then for each of these buckets, we needed some information about the households, about the savings. So first, we needed a criterion for what is the overall size of the population, and that was handed to us to be the 250% of the federal poverty level. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but now just real quick. So we're applying the 250% federal poverty level across the state, across all jurisdictions, across all of these geographic regions that we call PUMAs, which is public use micro data areas. And there are 44 of such PUMAs in Maryland, and we apply the 250% federal poverty across all of them. Now, I bring that up because when it comes to actual implementation of the program, that's not necessarily what historically has been done. On the multifamily side, for example, they don't use the federal poverty level, instead use the area median income. More about that in just a minute. So what we need, again, is we need the overall size of the population, and that's currently determined by those that fall below the 250% the federal poverty level. We need to know where they're located. So we assigned people a location based on 44 PUMAs in Maryland. We need to know the home type, whether they're single family, multifamily, or mobile homes. We need to know the heating system, whether it's electric, gas, or other. And we also needed some idea of the likely path they would follow in participating in the program. And currently there are two possible paths, Tier 1 and Tier 2. And the difference between the two, basically, is based on the kinds of measures that get installed. More about that also later. So we divided the state into 44 areas, and within each of these areas, we determined the number of households that qualify by type, by heating system, and by likely participation path. And then we used the 2013 to 2020 impact evaluations of the DHCD programs to assign the savings to each of these components. And then after that, it's just simple. We multiply the number of people, number of households, by the expected electric and or gas savings for that home type. And then we sum the total, and that tells us what the energy efficiency potential for the state. And then we break that down to individual utilities. So the first criterion, like I said, was the federal poverty level. That's done. But that does give us a very large population that makes the problem not within possible reach. So as you can see, based on just the 250% federal poverty level, we have some 552,000 households that fit that definition. These numbers will vary a little bit from the last presentation we did. It was mainly because we added mobile homes and we brought them in as single family for now. It's not entirely accurate, but honestly, it doesn't really matter that much because I think there are only like 15,000 mobile homes anyway, so it doesn't really change the total that much. So we, based on these 44 PUMAs, we found that 552,000 households meet the 250% federal poverty level. And then we determined the electric savings, again, by taking individual households and multiplying them by similar households that participated in the past. So this does strongly assume that the future would look like the past in terms of the measure mix that go into these homes, and then primarily that's it, the measure mix, because otherwise we're taking care of location and weather and home type and all that other important determinants of energy savings. So that gives us a total energy saving potential for the state at 859,000 megawatt hours. So obviously this is just not, it's not achievable because we have this. So this is equivalent more or less to a technical potential in the bottom-up approach. We have 500. There's potential to weatherize and provide services for 552,000 families. The problem with that, we all would love to serve all of them because that would be the right thing to do. But as far as resources are concerned, this will take, even if the level of service were to be increased to about 5,000, historically been a little bit less than 5,000, it will take 100 years and over $3 billion to achieve this. So obviously this is not doable. So what we needed was another screen, and that screen was the energy burden. And the energy burden, as you all know, is the total cost of energy divided by income. So as your income is lower, obviously the energy burden is higher. As illustrated in this table, if you look at the 0 to 50% of the federal poverty level, their energy burden is at 47%. And as the income increases, when we go to 250, it brings the overall average energy burden at 8.3%. So we needed some level of energy burden to apply to our population. And honestly, there's just no guidance on that at all. I've seen studies that called 8% high, and I believe the Uprise study in Maryland called 11% either high or extremely high, but there's no guidance on what that number should be. So we needed to come up with a number, and that number is very flexible. We can change it. Our calculator is extremely simple, and if you give us a different number, it's just a matter of hours or even less to produce all these tables again. So we went with 12.7, and the rationale for the 12.7 was that when we looked at the energy burden, the average energy burden across the 44 pumas, we went to the median of that. It's not a very traditional statistical approach to doing things, taking the median of a bunch of averages, which is what we did. But we thought 12.7 sounded pretty high, and it at least had some rationale behind it. So if we apply a 12.7 to this table, we go from 552,000 households to 167,000 households. So that's 30% of the initial population size, and that would have a 268,000 megawatt hour potential. So this is possibly doable. It depends on some of the issues I'm going to bring up at the end of some of the questions that we need to answer. Is, one of the questions is, like I said, do we apply the 250 across everybody? The answer, I think, to that is yes. The second question will be, do we apply 12.7 across the board, across all service territories and pumas? And I believe the answer to that is yes. That number should be standard across all service territories. It's just my opinion. But even when we do that, we are at 167,000 households. If we follow past participation rates, this could be still about 30 years to achieve. It is possible if increase the resources dedicated to the low-income programs, that something like 167,000 households could be done in about 10 years. So if we're talking about a 10-year goal, 167,000 is difficult but achievable potentially. I mean, certainly DHCD folks need to chime in and say so, but it's not a crazy number like a 552,000. Another way that we propose to look at it is to look at the highest need scores. So this is creating a composite index of various criteria like presence of children, elderly, disabled, and include the energy burden. You can take that number down to about 130,000 households. Again, if we're talking about a 10-year goal, 130,000 is not impossible. It's difficult, but it can be done. So the next steps were to take those numbers down to the specific utility level. And for that, I'm going to hand it over to my esteemed colleague, Scott Reeves. Scott, are you on?
Yep. Thanks, Sammy. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Thanks, everyone, for having us back. And yeah, so today we wanted to kind of, and Sammy, thanks for that recap. I think that was helpful. Because basically what we have here and kind of the new information we want to share is the breakdown of potential by the different utility territories that we have. So we're going to do that in the next couple slides. And so what we received shapefile data, so utility territory boundaries from the different Empower utilities that we've been working with, and we use that to define utility territory boundaries. So the statewide potential was across the full state using the PUMA territories that we had talked about. And here we're taking the households that make up those different PUMAs and break them into specific territories within the utility boundaries. So regarding the top-down approach, it remains the same. The only differences are that we're applying utility-specific savings values to the households that are within the specific territories for each of these five. And then we're also using these boundary lines and allocating the eligible households in cases where there's two utility boundaries that intersect one of the PUMAs. So we can talk more about that if there's questions. But basically, this is showing the outcome of the top-down potential for the full underserved population based on these data. And so you can see that, when we're looking at these territories, PG&E and PEPCO represent the largest portions. Still, there's the highest number of eligible households, about 47% and 22% respectively, in terms of the electric potential. A couple things to point out, also just caveats that based on the available geographic data, there are gaps that can be tightened in what we have here. So there's some boundary, like some of these utility territory boundaries, there's some slight overlaps, and so we've treated that a certain way here for the purposes of this study. And also for Delmarva and PE territories, there are some unis and co-ops that occur within the territories that we couldn't kind of cleanly extract. So, without getting some additional, data to be able to identify those. Talking to DHD, we thought that the Delmarva goals are probably around 50% of what we're reporting here, and for PE maybe closer to 90, just because there's less, less coverage with these non-Empower entities. But we want to just point that out and present this until we can firm up a better approach to refine them. And so, Sammy, if you jump to the next slide, same thing with gas territory, BGE and Washington gas territories. Based on the allocation, we looked at about 60% of the gas potential for PG&E, around 30% for Washington Gas, and the remainder to the other areas in gray. Again, some slight overlap with these shape files, a little bit more for these gas territories than we saw in the electric. And we, for the purposes of this exercise, just allocated the households where those overlaps occurred equally. But again, opportunity to refine that if we have some better data or guidance on how to do that.
Scott, I got a quick question for you.
Sure.
On WGL, it looks like there's a portion of its territory. It's got a little lighter orange than the rest of it. Is there a reason for that?
Is it the part where it's the orange is intersecting with the green BGE territory right in the middle?
Yeah, right there. Yes, sir.
That's the overlap that I was referring to.
Okay.
So yeah. No, that's fine. But again, it's a smaller area. It's a little bit larger than what we saw overlap on the electric territory boundaries. But again, easily fixed. And again, there's some probably margin of error with the totals that we're working with anyway. And so, I mean, I think directionally, like relatively, this is a good starting point.
But just so we're clear, when we have the 44 Puma territories, Puma geographic areas, and when they overlap, we don't really have a good way of deciding how much of that overlap goes to which utility. So right now, correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, we're splitting that 50-50 between the two utilities, right?
In cases where a Puma intersects with two utility boundaries, we look at the geographic area and allocate the proportion based on area to the two utilities. So that doesn't explicitly account for urban centers or where the population occurs within the Puma. So that's again something to just point out. But there's again we'll talk about it in a second. But I think kind of looking at some next steps, there are some ways to take this from a larger geographic designation at the Puma level down to a census tract level if there's interest. And so we can talk about that more in a second. So yeah, thanks. So here we have just more tabular data on what those maps showed. Sammy, you talked about a couple examples where we take the total base case and we've been able to look at some scenarios for targeting based on either an energy burden threshold or composite needs scoring. We didn't do that at the utility level yet, since we were hoping to get some more consensus or utility specific input on how those scenarios could or should be constructed. But if you jump to the next slide, Sammy, one that we did provide is just a zoom in for BGE, since it did have more Puma. It had around 22 or so of the Pumas, and so we could actually.
Sorry, Scott. Should you not talk about this one first? I mean, we did apply the energy burden to the utility level.
Oh, yeah. Actually, if you jump to the next one, that was I think you're in the yeah. Let's just jump here, and we can kind of step back to that if needed. But so the detailed example for BGE. So here we have the distribution of the energy efficiency potential, the electric potential for the Pumas within the BGE territory. And so this was, again, something to zoom in and provide a little bit more granularity for a utility territory in and of itself. But, we had been talking about this, and, before we would move forward, I guess I should say we think there's an opportunity to provide more granularity with these utility territories and shift the analysis from that PUMA level, where those PUMAs represent around 50 to 90,000 homes, to a census tract level, which is more like 5,000 or so. So right now, this is still showing a PUMA distribution, but helps think about kind of where there's, higher concentrations within a territory. It's something to consider as part of the next steps. So looking at some specific scenarios, like what we did for energy burden or the composite scoring within each of the utility territories themselves, or developing those granular estimates. And so taking this from those PUMA levels down to census tract, which we've got 22 geographies right here. It would be exponential, the increase in what we'd be able to see within a given utility territory, and that would, I think, be more meaningful to then do something like that composite needs score, where you can see more granularity about the populations across the individual territories. So I'll stop there. And Sammy, I know we talked about. I think we can skip this one for now. But yeah, we had talked about if you go back to that detailed slide, I know we had talked about the VGE example. I know we had talked about translating this into putting it more in the framework of goals, right? Like how do we take this and move it ahead in terms of thinking about taking these values and translating them to goals, right?
Right. So, I mean, what our task was to develop estimates of potential across the state and by individual utilities, and we have those. We haven't really refined the potential definition quite yet, but what is easy to do is to just say, everybody under 250% of the federal poverty level with an energy burden exceeding X, we have gone with a 12.7% as being X, and that gives you a number of households by service territory, by utility, and it gives you an electric and gas potential by territory. So the next question is really, what is achievable? We have given you sort of a technical potential, and now the question is, what is achievable? And if these goals are 10-year goals, or are they 3-year goals? That's one of the decisions the stakeholders have to decide. I mean, a 10-year goal would make these goals achievable, not easily, but achievable. But there's some other questions that this group also needs to tackle. I think we've tackled the federal poverty level as being the right number to apply statewide, regardless of service territory. And we're suggesting to you that we do the energy burden also equally across service territories, rather than having an energy burden that is utility specific. And it's just my own personal opinion that bad energy burden is just bad energy burden, regardless of where you're located, and regardless whether it's caused by your income being low or the rates being high. It's just an absolute measure. Anything more than X is bad, and we're proposing that we stick with 12.7 as being bad. But there's some other issues that the group really also needs to take on. Should we, in terms of implementing the program, and determining potential, we've done it with 250% of federal poverty level. We did not do it based on area median income. The area median income will give a different result. And there are additional questions that need to be answered there. What is the area? Is it a really small geographic area, or is it a county? So that's why the federal poverty level is a cleaner, easier way to go. But keep in mind that the programs currently are not being implemented that way. So at least that needs to be looked at. So energy burden, the same number across the board. Federal poverty level, same number, stick with federal poverty level. And really the biggest question is right now is, are we talking, what's the cycle here? Is this a 3-year cycle or a 10-year cycle? Yes, Dylan, we did actually include multifamily and multi and single family. Yep.
Dylan, jump on in.
Yeah, thank
Please.
you. I didn't want to stop. It sounded like, Sammy, you were wrapping up, and I have a kind of a more discussion question for you, but I didn't want to interrupt your flow.
No, please.
So this is very interesting data. I think the key question that you asked, about what is achievable, is a much broader kind of discussion question, and I think we should tread cautiously into sort of what assumptions we make about sort of resources and what's possible. But my question is a little bit different. My question is about from a kind of a goal setting and an equity policy perspective, how these sort of distributions of opportunity across the service territories differ from other ways to potentially slice goals. For example, percentage of load or percentage of low-income households. So I don't know if you can kind of comment about how this looks different if we imagine allocating opportunity or resources or targets based on these distributions, as opposed to if we did maybe a simpler or different allocation based on size of population, size of load, size of low-income population.
Yeah.
How different does this look? And what are the implications?
Yeah.
Thanks.
So first of all, Dylan, you're absolutely right. There's so many different ways you can define your goals. And one of the issues I think that this group was struggling with early on is whether to define goals as percent of even budgets, or
right.
And should the money get redirected in proportion to where the money is collected.
Right.
And I can tell you that we can answer any of those questions once we know which way we go. So if we can convert these to units of savings, and we can convert those to compare that to the Empower goals and say it becomes X% of the total savings of Empower. We could convert that to number of households and say X% of the households within a geographic region. Pretty much all of these, though, what worries me a little bit, once we answer the question how to best define goals, it's going to lead us down the road to different goals for different utilities, because the need is not equal across the service territories. And I'm not sure politically that is acceptable or not acceptable. But right now, our analysis is definitely saying that it's not equal. The problem is very widely different between service territories.
Well, not only is it, I mean, the service territories have very different size of populations, and so or size of load, and to the extent that collections of the Empower surcharge are reflective of load, right, and you pay in based on your load, and so from that sort of equity lens, that my question is sort of how much does it vary from that? So if we allocated resources based on who pays in, how much have we diverged from allocating resources based on the savings potential? That's kind of my question. Are we actually somewhat close in allocating resources, or in fact are we way off based on this analysis if we were allocating resources based on the savings potential? I don't know if that question makes sense, but how much does it matter is my part of my question, and maybe it's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think your question makes perfect sense. And at the moment, honestly, I don't think we have enough data to answer how different it would be, because I don't know, for example, how the Empower total monies, how are those collected by these service territories to decide what percent of that actually goes back to where it's collected. And I don't know what the total load is to decide if we figure that as percent of total load, how different would that be between service territories? But all of these questions are answerable.
Mm-hmm.
We just have not gotten there yet. We just wanted to know what the total potential is. And then all of these questions need to be answered to decide what the goals should be. I mean, we could just simply take the tables we currently have and say the goal is to serve, maybe some combination of energy burden and high need composite score, and that our goal is to get 130,000 households in the next 10 years. And we can allocate that to the various utilities and see how that comes out in terms of percent of individual utilities loads, percent of individual utilities budgets and power budgets, and so on. I imagine it's going to come out different. That it's not going to be the different ways of looking at it will produce different results. But we did not want to quite go there yet because I don't really know if the 130,000, first of all, if that's the right number, and then if it's the right number, over what time period. I can answer all of these questions, Dylan, if I knew the answer to these two questions. First, is the 130 okay? And then two, over what time period?
So this is my last comment, which gets more to a process on that and it's maybe for Judge McLean, you too, or for the whole group, are we at a point where you want to ask that question in a slightly more formal way of this work group for input on that? I think it would take a little bit of some conversation for OPC to sort of respond, but I don't have an answer for you today. But I guess a sort of a process question is, are you, or Cadmus or DHCD as sort of sponsor, asking for input more specifically to that question? Because this is a really important question. And I think once you start to imply a level of a goal that may be feasible or not feasible, that starts to have a life of its own. And so I guess I'm interested in whether or not we're at the moment where parties should weigh in on this question. What is achievable? What is reasonable? How should we define a target? If so, we'll need a little bit of time to think about that, but maybe that's the moment we're at.
So it's like 2:00 good for you, Dylan? All right. Scott, you had your hand up, sir.
Yeah, hi, it's Scott with DHCD. So I think that's a valid question, Dylan, and I think from DHCD's perspective, it's not up to Cadmus or DHCD to be identifying, what that goal will be. The idea with of this report was to present to the group what the potential is. And Cadmus did a great job of even laying out different scenarios to help kind of narrow down the potential. But I think at this point, it's, I think as you were alluding to, it's time for the work group to start having the conversation of, what does the work group think the goal should be? I think Cadmus can work the numbers however they see it may work, but I think the work group has to make some decisions, which will then help us, further either the study or help us, once a goal has been established, how do we use this data to design future programs for meeting those goals?
All right. Thank you, sir. Got a couple hands up. Dr. McNeil and then Mr. Gravatt.
Kitson McNeil, Maryland Energy Administration. Related to, I guess, the discussion that's going on right now, I have a couple of questions that I think probably I would like answered potentially before we move on to setting a goal. And so I guess related to the data that has been presented today, the 580,000 or 550,000, how much of that has been or is identified in a system through programs? How much of that is just projected? I don't know if we have an answer for that because, and I think I raised this point last week that I'm fairly confident that the utilities have served some of these customers. And how do we account for that in our analysis in setting a goal going forward?
Yep, that's an excellent point. So we had identified some 580,000 households that fit that category. under 250% the federal poverty level. And we've identified that since 2013, DHCD has served a little over 30,000. And you keep in mind also that you requalify to receive services after X number of years anyway. So it's not like you're served and you're out. You can roll back into the program. But that's how we get to the 550, is going from 580 and remove 30 that had been already served. I don't have numbers on what customers have been served by other utility programs.
No, I completely understand, but I think in order to take a comprehensive approach to serving the needs of the income qualified customers, we need to understand the potential for some of them to participate in directly with the utility versus through DHCD. So is the goal that we're hoping to set here, and based on the goal structure, my understanding was the goal would be a broad goal that would be based on utility service territory that would include the utility and DHCD serving some of these customers. So how do we divvy up those numbers to ensure that we're at least addressing the issues, the problems that need to be solved, and we're attacking it with the right amount of resources, for instance?
Yeah, but we certainly can look at the total size of the population after we've defined it, and if that number is 130,000, and then you could look at historical participation in DHCD programs and assume it continues. And that leaves you the size of the pie that can go to other utility programs. Okay. Or you can assume that DHCD can double. So there's some scenario playing, I guess, is the answer.
Okay. All right. I appreciate the response. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Gravatt?
Thank you, Your Honor. Jim Gravatt on behalf of the Energy Efficiency Advocates. And first of all, thank you, Sammy and Scott, for doing all this work and sharing it with us. Really interesting stuff. And I think I'm going to respond to Dylan's question about goal setting, and I don't have an answer at all. But but stepping back a little bit, we've got this framework that says, with a lot of non-defined items in it, that the low income or equity goal will be some percentage of whatever the overarching goal is that we think is going to be framed in greenhouse gas abatement. And we've got this potential study, which everyone knows. I had some reservations about the bottom-up study that's going to be done, which is going to provide some probably useful information to consider. And so I'm not sure how we proceed yet without that other information and without more information about the sort of the overarching goal framework and so forth. I think we could. I think there's plenty of information here that, and I guess, I think from the advocate's perspective, what we've been pushing for years now is we just need to do a lot more. And whether a lot more is, where along the line is, there's that 1% of low income load number that's been floating in the General Assembly for a few years, but it just needs to be a lot more. So I don't know how we actually get there from these data and whatever's going to happen in the potential study and the 1% goal and all of that. But Your Honor, I think I'd need till at least 3 o'clock if Dylan is going to do it by 2. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else? And I'm obviously fine with giving parties as much time as they need to respond to the study and the questions that have been proposed in terms of what's the right number, what's the time period. Do we want to push it out? Dylan, is like a week good? And then maybe we can schedule another meeting just to talk about this issue.
This is a good question. I guess, OPC has suggested some limited income sort of goal concepts previously, sort of about sort of parity of, achieving savings in relation to sort of share of households that are limited income. And I think what I would recommend for OPC is to take this data and this analysis, which is quite interesting, and see if we want to sort of make any revisions to our proposal for, what a useful type of target is. I think probably disinclined to recommend a number of households or something like that. But I think a week is a good framework for us to at least to think about whether or not we would update or revise our sort of our limited income goal concept.
All right, that's fair. Anyone else want to weigh in?
Just allow me to reiterate that all of the questions that Dylan did raise, I said that earlier. I mean, we can answer all of them, and maybe it would make sense to be able to think about the number and the length of cycle in terms of what that means. What does that mean in terms of the reduction of the total overall low income load? What does that mean in terms of the proportion of the Empower goals that are specifically low income? And what does that mean in terms of percent of budget going to low income and all of that? But I think that what I still continue to be uncomfortable with is that it's going to take us down the road of unequal goals across the utilities, and just want us to be prepared that is going to happen. Unless you want to do this at the state level, which we can also do, and then just say the same goal applies across the state. It will reduce the work on our side significantly, depending on which way we go. I mean, I suppose we could do it both ways, but I'm just telling you, going to the service territory utility level, it will lead to goals that are different.
I think that's on our mind. What the trade-off in precision versus uniformity. I think that is something that OPC will want to understand before really taking a more firm position on which way is better to go. I think if you are open, and I don't know what these questions or these requests might be right now, but I think with a little bit of more conversation for VEIC and OPC, if you're open to crunching a number or two differently and sort of seeing what that looks like, we would likely avail ourselves of that opportunity. I don't think nothing really complicated, but some of those questions, Sammy, that I've sort of implied or come up, if that was possible to do over the coming week or two, I mean, I think that we would try and figure out what would be useful for us. So.
And I just threw out a week just as an example. If parties need more time to formulate their positions, and I'm certainly not going to dictate work-wise what Sammy and Scott are going to have to do here. I'll leave that to them and the parties.
But if there's room to sort of do some comparisons, like just looking at what would this look like if you split it this way versus that way versus that way, I don't think that would necessarily be complicated. But doing that might help OPC refine its preferred sort of goal metric, and that would include what does this look like if you do it on a statewide basis and then you just sort of divide it up, or what would this look like if you have a utility specific goal?
I will speak on Scott's behalf and say that he is going to be able to do this work.
Yeah, I think we can think about this a little bit more. One thing I am thinking about, and Jim had mentioned this, just having a goal framework that's considering greenhouse gas impacts. I mean, this makes me think more to like looking at kind of areas with the highest energy potential, which are also, variable throughout the state. So I think we could maybe look at a couple comparisons. I mean, you'd also mentioned equity, and we used energy burden like as an example for this scenario, and we used that other composite scoring approach to bring in a couple other criteria that are used historically for prioritization, which also has an equity component to it. So I think that if you use a couple of those criteria, you're going to get kind of totals or areas to focus on that are going to be variable across the territories. But I think we can pull a couple scenarios together just to show how variable those look. So that's something that I think we could do in relatively quickly, and let folks digest that and think more about like where goals will fall down either at the utility or state level.
How about Scott and I get together and talk about the different ways we could slice this analysis, and what sort of data we would need from the utilities to do so, and about the time frame. But I suspect we could turn this around pretty quickly. If for example, I mean, I don't know, maybe Joe is still on the phone or not, but maybe we could get the Empower goals for next year across all the Empower programs. We have most of the other data that we need, I think, as is. So anyway, Scott and I will send an email to the entire group and say, here's what we propose to do, and here's what we do need to do a specific metric for determining goals.
Well, I think that sounds great for me.
And if I may, Your Honor, this is Nicole Zeichner on behalf of OPC. It might be helpful if we could have 2 weeks for this, simply because of some schedules at the office next week.
No, that's fine. And again, I just threw out 1 week just as just first thing that came to my mind. And it sounds like it could be a little more work than maybe originally anticipated, especially once you start asking people for inputs. I bet Scott is going to be could be very busy over the next few days. But you guys said initially at the forefront that this was just addition and multiplication, that it wasn't complicated. So I'm kidding, of course. So why don't we? Does anybody else have any comments, concerns, questions? I'm sure everybody will respond to Scott and Sammy's email when it comes out. Why don't we do this? I know we're supposed to have final low income comments due next week. Why don't we scratch that, and we'll just make that at a later time to be determined, because my guess is whatever comes out of the further analysis and the different scenarios, folks are going to want to both submit something in writing and or discuss it with a meeting, and I'm sure people will want to ask Sammy and Scott some additional questions on that. So why don't we table that for now, unless there's any objections? Scott, Sammy, does that sound okay to you?
Sounds perfect to me.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
All right. Okay. So, all right. So I'll issue another modified timeline, just essentially striking the comments of the due date for the LMI goals and programs and climate equity, and we'll put that off to be, at a later date. So we don't have a meeting scheduled for the next couple weeks. Next due date is the 21st, where parties are going to be submitting evaluation protocols and cost effectiveness comments, as well as final comments on, energy efficiency, demand response, fuel switching, and so forth. All right. And unless anyone has anything else, I think that's all we have for today.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Take care.
Take care.